Tonight I want to talk with you about the subject of determination. A subject I've had to learn a lot about, especially this year. Flying across the Sahara Desert of North Africa is an incredible experience if you got a window seat. For hours and hours and hours, the only thing you'll see is scorching extent of sand. The only thing that you will see for miles is sand. The undulating dunes can reach 600 feet deep. It's the hottest, harshest desert in the world. And it's as big as the United States, including Hawaii and Alaska. Along with sand dunes of gravel-covered plains and salt flats and barren plateaus. The eastern boundary of the Sahara Desert is the Red Sea and the western edge of the Atlantic Ocean. It's like America between the Atlantic and the Pacific, except it's all Death Valley. One November morning, 3 men had dipped their toes in the cold waters of the Atlantic in Senegal and began to run. Their goal was the Red Sea, 4,300 miles away. Charlie Engle, Ray Zahab, and Kevin Lynn were attempting something never before conceived of in history, to run across the Sahara Desert. They were doing it to raise awareness of the millions living in Africa without access to clean water. But according to Charlie Engle, he and his friends were driven to be pioneers. The challenge of doing something nobody had ever done before just got in their spirit. Their journey was plagued with all kinds of challenges, some of which were geographical. Their route ran through 6 different nations: Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Libya, and Egypt. They endured blazing temperatures, sandstorms, government corruption, and sometimes they had to run on 2-lane highways where cars were going by them at more than 100 miles an hour. The physical challenges were even greater. The 3 friends averaged almost 40 miles a day, and there were several days in which they ran the equivalent of 2 marathons back to back. Each runner had to work through more than 50 blisters on his feet. They lost weight, they faced dehydration, and they slept no more than 5 hours each night. But the biggest obstacle for the runners was not physical or geographical, it was mental. It was much more of a mental exercise than physical, said Engle. It was much tougher on the mind than it was on the body. Near the end, the runners were seriously breaking down. 2 suffered from severe tendinitis. All 3 were dealing with intestinal viruses. Their feet had swollen into another shoe size. The youngest runner, Kevin Lynn, began to talk openly about giving up and going home. As expedition leader, Charlie Engle encouraged him to stay the course, to keep trying as hard as possible until the last moment. Engle said, "It's something I learned from adventure racing. Don't ever pull yourself from the course. Go until you can't, because something might change. You keep going." And they did. They kept going, and they dipped their toes in the cold water of the Red Sea after 111 grueling days. It was an unequaled feat, and they wanted me to spell that F-E-E-T instead of F-E-A-T. If you're checking into the dictionaries online, you probably couldn't find a better definition of endurance than Charlie Engle's statement, "You just keep going." That's what it means to endure. And that's what Jesus communicated to his disciples on the Mount of Olives. If you read the Mount of Olives speech that Jesus gave, you know that he prophesied days that were frightening for many reasons. He warned about deception from inside and outside of the church. He warned about wars and rumors of wars. He warned about famines and earthquakes and pestilences. He foresaw tribulation and persecution, lawlessness and lovelessness. Even those who profess to be Christians, he said, would fall away. But all the negatives that he said about the future, all the things that he prophesied, lead to an incredible positive, a phenomenal promise. Here's what he said in verse 13. "But he who endures will be saved." Now that's a very controversial verse, and if you hang with me, I'll try to straighten out the controversy before we're done. But I want you to know that the promise was true for Christ or his disciples. They endured attacks from the Roman Empire, from religious leaders in their own community. The promise was always true for all who remained faithful to God throughout the ups and downs of history. The promise is especially critical for believers today as we approach the world of the end. Yes, we are facing obstacles and difficulties. In many ways, it seems like we're running the Sahara Desert. But we have a race to run, and we can't give up. We have to keep going with enthusiasm, the strength of Christ within us, and the victory in sight. I say this and I preach this tonight because I'm running into so many Christians who've just been so beat up by COVID and so overwhelmed by inflation and all the other stuff that's happening. Almost, you see them almost wanting to quit. And the Bible tells us, as we've already learned from our story, it's too soon to quit. You have to determine what you're going to do. You have to decide, as we sang earlier, to follow Jesus. You have to make that decision. Let's look again at the first part of Jesus' promise. Here's what he said. He said, but he who endures. The scriptures are packed with admonitions and encouragements for God's people to keep going in tough times. The biblical writers employed many terms to describe this quality. It's endurance, it's steadfastness, it's faithfulness, it's perseverance. But the